Good morning, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Mr. Stern, one of the two Mr. Sterns here. I teach chemistry and biology. And today, we're going to talk about a very solemn ritual, the one true thing that combined two people together with a glue that no mere mortal can break. Of course, I'm talking about the pinky promise. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, or maybe the pinky swear as well. For those of you who don't know, it's when you promise to do something and then you hold your pinky and the other person clasps it with their pinky, and just like that, you're bound forever. You can never go back on that promise. So as a demonstration, if I were to hold up my pinky with somebody else and we were to say, we promised to eat 1 million Oreos today, and then we pinky promised we would have to eat 1 million Oreos today. Now, I was just kind of curious about this, so I went to Wikipedia, of course, and a quick Wikipedia search reveals that this ritual has actually been around in the U.S. since at least 1860, with this little accompanying vow from the Dictionary of Americanisms: pinky, pinky, bow, bell, whoever tells a lie will sink down to the bad place and never rise up again. I never said that, but maybe you have. I don't know. To continue on with the Wikipedia page, it also says on Wikipedia that in Japan, the pinky promise is not the pinky promise. Instead, it's called the finger cutoff, and it comes along with this cheery little vow: finger cut off 10,000 fist punchings. Whoever lies has to swallow 1,000 needles. Cute. So this is typically something that children do, but why? Because it's a concrete way of adding a level of solemnity to something that you say you're going to do. For example, if you say, I'm going to give you all my dessert, that's one thing, but if you say, I pinky promise that I'm going to give you all my dessert, that's something entirely different, and it's way better. But for some reason, adults don't typically pinky promise. So on casual occasions, how do adults add that level of commitment to a promise? Typically, in my experience, it's with these words: trust me. Really, it's just an amplifier to some kind of verbal contract. We will do what we're saying, and how do you know? Well, it's easy, just trust me. But we know that trusting another person is hard. And it takes time to build a relationship, and we need to see the other person has our best interest at heart and that they're actually able and willing to do what they promise to do. Today, we're going to look at a great story about trust. This is the Matthew 14 account of Jesus walking on water. Now, there are several incredible messages in this story, but today, if we look carefully, we'll see that this story is actually a picture of Jesus telling all of his people of all time to trust him. We'll read the story. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. But when he saw, Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and began to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You little faith, he said, why do you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, one of the first interesting things we see in the story is that the disciples didn't recognize Jesus as first. Now, in the Bible, it's very common to see the same motif used in many stories to teach a lesson. Here we're looking at the idea that when God appears to people and they don't recognize him, what is he trying to teach? In many of these cases, the lesson God is trying to teach is, trust me. There are many examples, but we'll just look at a few. First of all, we have Jacob wrestling with God. This is in Genesis 32. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Jacob said, please tell me your name. What was the deeper message here? It's God telling Jacob, trust me. I promised you that I would be there with you as you go back to your homeland, even if you think that your brother Esau wants to kill you. Another one is Jesus appearing to the two men on the road to Emmaus from Luke 24. Now that same day, two of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. And also, Mary Magdalene didn't recognize Jesus after the resurrection. Mary stood outside the tomb crying when the angels asked her, woman, why are you crying? They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. In both of these stories, the deeper message is, trust me in my promises. I told you I would die and rise again. And the list could go on, as the Bible is filled with examples of God appearing to people who didn't recognize him. But many of these times, the message is for them and for us, God saying, trust me. And so it is with our story. The disciples are out in the Sea of Galilee just before dawn, and they see Jesus, but they don't recognize him. So, using biblical context, you should recognize that God is going to be teaching us a lesson about trust. The disciples cry out, "It's a ghost." And how does Jesus respond? He said, "It is I." However, the English here doesn't tell the whole story. The Greek words are ego eimi. There we go. Or what that means in Greek isn't "it is I," but rather "I am." Now think back to the Old Testament. Who says that? God says that at the burning bush when he's talking to Moses. Moses is instructed to go to the Israelites and lead them out of slavery in Egypt. He says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. I am has sent me to you." As the disciples knew that God was saying this to Moses, here Jesus is deliberately saying the same thing. He is God as well, the I am. And there's that message again. Trust me. Trust me in the days and years ahead when you see me crucified, when you are persecuted on my behalf. And why should the disciples trust him? Why should we trust him? Because he's God, the Almighty, the words, I am. Not only does he have power to guard and guide our lives according to his purpose, but he also loves us and has shown us time and time again that he works in our lives for our eternal good and for the good of his kingdom. I don't know if that was lost on the disciples, but Peter, whether he was just unsure or just excited to see Jesus, told Jesus that if it was in fact him, he was coming out onto the water too. So Jesus said, "Come," and Peter walked on the water out to him. I don't think it's always so obvious to us modern day people that this act actually took a great deal of trust. The disciples didn't have powerful lights, they didn't have personal flotation devices or life rings, but Peter trusted that he could get out to Jesus, and he also walked on the water through the power of Jesus. But then Peter stopped trusting as he walked farther and farther from the boat, away from the earthly things that he thought could help him, the boat, his friends who could throw him a line. His trust began to waver, and he began to see the waves and realize that he was, in fact, walking on water, which is beyond the normal human experience. So what happened when he stopped trusting in Jesus? He started to sink. The lesson here is that we may not always recognize God in our lives. Sometimes it may seem like he's not there when the waves are high and we are doubting, and instead of trusting in Jesus and continuing to walk in faith, we lose our trust, just like Peter did, and we rely on earthly things for our safety and comfort. But this lack of trust in God is a sin. Even if it's not a wholesale crisis of faith, even simple worry is a lack of trust and is also a sin. We're all guilty of it, but it makes it no less sinful. However, when we fail at this, we get the same response from Jesus that he gave from Peter. He reaches out his hand and says, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" But look at how Jesus says this. He's not berating Peter for doubting. Rather, he says it to Peter with forgiveness in his voice and words. He's saying to Peter, "Why did you doubt? I've never let you down before, and I never will. I will always be here for you and with you." In the same way, he forgives our weak faith and gently reminds us of his promise to be at our side in all things. "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you," from Hebrews 13:5. And like the father of the demon-possessed mute boy in Mark, we say, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." And know that in all things you're forgiven through Jesus, as we read in Ephesians 1:7. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. And that's a promise from God, the great I am, that we can put our trust in. We're going to sing together as a prayer. We're going to sing hymn 451, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," verses 1 through 3. And we close with a blessing from the Middle Ages that I thought fit our lesson well. May God the Father bless us. May Christ take care of us. The Holy Spirit enlighten us all the days of our life. The Lord be our defender and keeper of body and soul, both now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen.